In this episode of Poddenham Podspur, the Tottenham Hotspur podcast, about Tottenham Hotspur Podcasts, I'm joined by Barnaby Slater. Barnaby is the host of the daily Tottenham Hotspur podcast, Spurred On, but actually started his content creation career over 10 years ago with the first, or one of the first, Tottenham fan channels, also known as Spurred On. Barnaby in this episode shares some brilliant stories about his time and experiences as both an independent creator and somebody working for a media company.
Why are there so many podcasts about Tottenham? Do I want to know why? They might contain insight, but mostly delusions. If I hear one more, I might die. They don't like Levy and they don't like Enoch. They pine for Moo and Conte.
Hello Barnaby, how are you?
Yes, I'm really well. And I wanted to start by just saying, firstly, thank you so much for having me on. And secondly, I think your podcast is one of the great concepts of our time. And I wanted to congratulate you on such a brilliant idea. I actually used to work in television development, coming up with formats for like BBC format entertainment development, MTV, IMG Sports Media, and so I'm always on the lookout for excellent formats. And Poddenham Podspur is it really, honestly, the moment because as we said before we started recording, I first heard you when you were on the lab with Flav. The moment I heard about it, I came back home and told my girlfriend, and she was pissing herself laughing. She thought it was the best idea ever as well. So it's an honor to be on here, Iain. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you for coming on. I operate on the what philosophy with this podcast. Your initial reaction is, what? Then you have a bit of a, oh yeah, hell yeah, this is all right. And then it gets in a little bit more, and then you go back to the what stage.
Yeah.
So Barnaby, why don't you tell us about yourself, your Spurs story, your background? For those who don't know, I should have already previewed this in my intro, but Barnaby has been making Spurs content for the last 10 years as a fan channel, and has now transitioned to more of a daily podcast format. But yeah, Barnaby, tell us a little bit about you.
So my Spurs story is that my stepdad was an enormous Manchester United fan, and so much so that he hated Arsenal, Man United and Arsenal back in the 80s and early. Not as much now, still a bit, but they really, really hated one another. And he hated Arsenal so much that he bought me a 1986 Le Coq Sportif blue Spurs away shirt, and it just happened at the right time, and I wouldn't take it off. And then my first recollection of watching Spurs and being a Spurs fan properly was the 1987 Cup final against Coventry, which of course we lost. Own goals, diving headers, etc., etc. And then from there, my childhood really was just Spurs. All I ever really was passionate about was sport and football, and my idol was Paul Gascoigne. I spent the majority of my childhood in the bushes around the back of my goal mouth in my back garden, one of those kind of half-size goals, having tried to recreate the Paul Gascoigne 1991 FA Cup semi-final goal against Arsenal. And so that's really it. My first game, I think, that I went to, my stepdad took me to White Hart Lane to see Spurs Wimbledon when Vinnie Jones broke Gary Stevens' leg whilst Gary Stevens was actually off the pitch. And I just really remember that feeling of first walking up the steps and seeing the grass and seeing the fans, and it just being like one of the very few things about my childhood I really remember, but also the very few feelings of something being absolutely magical. And any friends of mine that I've had, since I was at uni, really, which is where most of my friendship circles still are from now, they'll just know that all I ever bang on about is sport, football, and mostly Spurs. So that's my Tottenham story. And I kind of, a little bit, just to kind of finish it, I kind of think, yes, Tottenham is, an added trauma to my life without a doubt. But also I think supporting Tottenham is like there's something about it that's so aspirational that you never quite reach where you're desperate to go, that almost it's kind of good for the other parts of your life as well. Because I do kind of feel like, and maybe this will change if Spurs get bought by Qatar and we start winning things properly, I do kind of think if you're a City or a Chelsea fan these days, like, do you really care about it as much as I do? I think that's unlikely. I think it's unlikely.
Yeah, or do you want it as much?
No, I just
yeah,
don't see how
I
they
don't think you
can want
can.
it
No,
enough as much. No.
no. And I can absolutely echo what you're saying about Paul Gascoigne in the early 90s. I was an 86 birth, but I remember being 4 or 5 years old and wanting
Mm.
my hair cut like him. I walked
Mm.
everywhere, my Spurs tracksuit, thinking I was Paul Gascoigne. It must have been very cute and very infuriating for my parents for me to be that kind of kid at that age.
Did you come from a Tottenham family? Is that what got you into it, or was it Gazza himself?
No, it was a Tottenham family. My dad's a Spurs fan. My older brother's a Spurs fan. My grandfather kind of listened to every London club on the radio. He didn't have a preference particularly.
Mm-hmm.
I was born and raised around Oxford, so not necessarily a tie physically to the geography of the club, but so much, my dad, when he was growing up, Spurs were great. So they hooked him young,
There you
and
go.
then hooked my brother in the 80s, and then hooked me in 91, and then I think I had the roughest of all of us.
Well, you see, so me and you, you're probably just about the generation, younger than me, but we're both still striving for something that we're yet to achieve, which is a championship, basically, or a Champions League. And we got so close, and that gave us a sniff, and still something to strive for.
And it shows us the template to how to do it again, I think, and that's what we're always trying to replicate. But we're not here to talk about Spurs. We're not here to talk about actual on-field, stuff that 99% of the fan base care about. We're here to talk about podcasts.
Of course, apologies. I mislaid the whole idea of this
Yeah.
podcast for a second. I apologize.
What a preposterous idea to come onto a Spurs podcast and not talk about Spurs. So take us back to the early days of Spurred On, what the concept was, how it started, and how you were supported in putting it out there.
Yeah, so basically, for those who don't remember or are too young to remember, I started a channel called Spurred On, which was a digital channel, kind of mainly YouTube, but also then cutting down all of our longer form content for back then, kind of Facebook and Twitter and mainly. That was back in
Vines, maybe, right? Would you have done Vines?
I don't think we ever did Vines. No, I don't think we ever did. But that was back in 2015. And that came about because, like I said earlier, my background was in TV, and I saw a job advert on a job website that just said, "Are you passionate about football, and do you have a background producing television?" So I sent an email back saying yes and sending my CV or whatever. And then the next email I got back just said, "Who do you support?" And I wrote back, "I support Spurs." But it was actually, I remember it being the day after Tottenham lost to Chelsea, I think, in the League Cup final. Was that 2015? Yeah, 2015.
Sounds right.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it might have been that day where Poch weirdly picked Sonny to play left wing back.
Yeah, I think so.
Anyway, it was the day after. So I wrote, "Well, I support Spurs, but also I'm so angry after yesterday that maybe I should stop supporting Spurs." Made some kind of joke about it. And anyway, basically what was happening at the time was Fremantle Media, who are a huge production company, make The X Factor, back in the day made Neighbours, blah, blah, blah. One of the biggest production companies in the world. They had a man working there called Neil Smythe, who was from back in the previous days, one of the producers from the beginning of Soccer AM with Tim Lovejoy and all those guys, Tubes, Rocket, etc., etc. And Neil Smythe had seen, basically, he was really ahead of his time, had seen the possibilities of fan channels. He'd seen what was happening at Arsenal Fan TV, what is now AFTV, what was called Arsenal Fan TV, and thought there's money to be made here. So he started a Manchester United fan channel at Fremantle, with Fremantle. Back with, and that was with like Adam McCullough and those guys who are, still Stephen Howson, who now does all the Rio Ferdinand channel stuff. And then he kind of pitched to his higher ups at Fremantle that he thought they should start fan channels for all the major clubs. So that's kind of what happened. They started a Spurs one, which was mine, Spurred On. They started a Chelsea one, which was presented and run by Rory Jennings, the Chelsea fans channel. So I was sat next to Rory. They started a Man City one with Stephen McInerney, and then they started a Barcelona and a Real Madrid one over the course of about 18 months. And they also started an overarching fan channel called the Football Republic, which was started by Adam Boltwood, who's now a real head honcho in content at the FA. So basically, everybody who started those channels has gone on to become millionaires to some degree. I mean, I'm exaggerating with the word millionaires. I mean, unless I'm talking about Rory Jennings, who I'm pretty sure is a millionaire. But they've all done really, really well in football content. And I started Spurred On, and my feeling for Spurred On at the time was, because Tottenham hadn't yet transitioned into that moment with Pochettino where we were suddenly like, hold on, this could actually really be something. It was still like, I would say, because right now, I don't know if you're the same, Ian, but right now I'm talking about Thomas Frank in a similar way to how I look back on Pochettino's first season, where there are a lot of ups and downs. He's trying to get his feet under the table. He's trying to work out exactly what his team's going to be, and obviously over windows, hopefully we'll get players into to make it up into something that could become the Pochettino brilliance, right? So when I spoke to Neil about Spurred On, I was like, I don't think we could do a serious Spurs channel because we're just a laughing stock. Everyone just takes the piss out of Spurs. They've never won anything. So I was like, my background is in stand-up comedy, which I also did a lot of from about 2007 onwards. So I was like, what I'd like to do really is make a kind of tongue-in-cheek Spurs channel where we do talk about the stuff that happens, but we never take ourselves too seriously. Mm-hmm. So as a result, I employed Rhys James, who I think he just started doing Mock the Week at the time, but he's a brilliant stand-up comedian. And I found Craig Mitch, who has since went on to host Match of the Day X and do all sorts of stuff as well. And that was kind of the genesis of Spurred On. And straight away, I mean, I'm probably answering some questions you were going to come to, but straight away, I got quite a lot of pushback from the Spurs community at that time. And I think a lot of that was to do with the fact that, if you're being paid for what you're doing in the fan community, you are dubbed quickly a plastic fan, which is basically you're not a real fan, almost to some degree, like you're pretending to be a fan. You know how a lot of people suggest that Mark Goldbridge isn't really a Manchester United fan because he used to be a policeman, or supposedly he once supported Nottingham Forest or something. So I got a lot of pushback from the community quite early on, but I'd say the main part of that, not only about the plastic fan thing, was that I think a lot of the Tottenham fan base who had found Spurred On were very scared that we were going to try and do what Arsenal Fan TV did, by which I mean kind of characterize or make characters of Tottenham fans outside the ground and become a laughing stock in that way. And that was never the plan.
Yeah, I remember that. Hugely, it was such a big concern. And I think Spurs fans in particular, and maybe this is true of other fan bases, but really value authenticity. I'm not quite sure where that comes from, whether it's a reaction in recent years to AFTV and what they see there, or Mark Goldbridge. I don't know. It's maybe more recent.
The internet as a whole, I think. The internet as a whole, the kind of clickbait, the knowing that the less authentic you are and the more fake, aggravated and annoyed you are, the more money you're going to make.
Yeah, exactly. And there were also a few incidents, I suppose, a few years before that, like the Top 4 Is Our Everything song that came out,
What year was that?
That must have been around 2010, right?
I do remember that. Is that what's worse, that or you just got caned?
Yeah, okay. I think it's probably the Top 4 one. The caned one is probably worse overall, but the Top 4 one in terms of aspirations, I feel like.
Yeah, and I should say I also have made some content-based mistakes, so I'm not having a go at those people at all. I think when you work in the world of content, you sometimes have these ideas and you're like, this is going to be brilliant, and then you realize within 10 seconds of pressing publish that you are the worst person in the world.
But you have to take some creative risks, otherwise you're just making the same stuff. I was also looking back through some of the stuff that Spurred On put out, and I did come across the Amy Winehouse Rehab cover that you guys did.
I would put that down as my biggest mistake.
Really? Because I really enjoyed it.
Well, but here's why I would call it the biggest mistake, and I don't believe you, but certainly what I would say is we had a lot of success, considering how small a channel we were. We'd had a lot of success with this song we did, which was based on Song for Whoever by The Beautiful South, where it was all about the players that Spurs nearly signed. And it did really well. And that I didn't realize at the time, but the reason that did really well is because we were doing what Spurred On was supposed to be all about, lightly taking the piss out of ourselves. Sorry.
A bit of gallows humor.
A bit of gallows humor, exactly. But then then I got a little bit overconfident and thought, oh, why don't we do one where we take the piss out of Arsenal? But that was wrong, the wrong idea kind of as a concept. And secondly, I released it on the day, and I'm taking all responsibility for it, even though I didn't sing it. It's my channel, so I take all responsibility for it. But we released it on the day that Spurs then lost to Arsenal in the League Cup at home, and I thought, this will bang because Spurs will beat Arsenal, and then everyone will be like taking the piss out of Arsenal, and it couldn't have gone wrong anymore. So, totally understand why people absolutely despised me after that. But you live and learn.
Yeah, I think the timing maybe killed you there. I didn't realize it was on the same day as that loss.
Oh, but
I
it's
just
also just an awful idea, Ian.
I
Honestly, it was
know.
just a terrible idea.
I mean, maybe it's because I'm looking back now, and there's a lot of cringe
Without the
online.
anger.
Yeah, there's a lot of cringe online. It's a well-made, well-produced song and video. It's
Mm.
got some fun little bits in it, some fun hooks. The singing's
I mean, I
good.
think we should tell the audience because there'll be a lot of people who don't know it.
Yeah.
It was, if I remember it rightly, it was my dad tried to make me support Arsenal, and I
Yes,
said no,
thank
no,
you.
no to Rehab by Amy Winehouse.
Thank you. I'll
Shameful.
I'll link it in the show notes.
I think I'm still to this day blocked by a number of big names in the Spurs community, and that may well be why.
I mean, if you look through the YouTube comments or some Reddit comments, it's a mixture of people salivating over the woman singing, which is kind of gross.
Yeah,
People who love it and people who hate it, and that's just the nature of online content. Some people are going to love what you're trying to do. Some people are going to hate
yeah,
what you're trying to do, and you just got to take
yeah.
those risks. I
I
think.
think look, it's
Yeah.
important to take ownership of things that you feel like. I'm glad you said the word cringe because I kind of basically cringe when I think about it now. But there'll be things, honestly, there'll be things that I'm doing right now, kind of on TikTok and stuff, that in a year's time or a day's time I'll be cringing as well. So
Yeah.
that's the nature of the beast, I think. And like you said, you kind of have to take risks, and being creative means you're kind of putting yourself out there all the time, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's a scary business.
And I forget her name, but the woman who supports Everton, who does a lot of,
Yes.
you
Well, I've
know,
got an Everton. I know who you're talking
you
about.
know
I've
what I'm talking
forgotten her
about.
name as well. Yeah, yeah. Who does the
Very,
songs?
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But she, well, and look, and there's a guy who's just started doing Arsenal songs on TikTok, and he is, I think, almost as part of it. He's got a terrible voice, but he's doing quite well. And I look at that and I'm like, what is he playing at? But then I have to quickly remember, oh no, you made that mistake 10 years ago. You're an
Yeah.
idiot.
Yeah, that's why I think that it's actually some of the stuff that Spurred On was doing that maybe you look back on, ooh, with maybe a sour reflection at times. In the current context of what people are making, was actually ahead of its time. And
Yeah.
um, now
I
you
think there
just
was a lot of. I think there was a lot of good stuff. I think pretty much all the stuff we did with Reese, I would stand up for and hold up. I think he's a bit of a genius, and he's a huge Spurs fan as well. Craig
yeah.
was also good at what he did, and then I actually ended up going from Spurred On when they closed Spurred On because they realized quite quickly that the club channels weren't making Fremantle enough money. I then started producing the Football Republic, and I took Reese with me. Reese, we were lucky to get Reese for what we were paying him at the time. It was mad.
Yeah, it was, and he was always good on Mock the Week too. The name of the woman who sings the Everton songs I'm thinking about is Pepper Mills.
Pepper Mills, that's right. So I've got a friend, actually a lot of family of mine, because my father's side are all from Liverpool, but I've got a lot of family who are Everton, and I've also got a friend who's a big Everton fan who loves Pepper Mills.
Yep, I think it's very tongue in cheek. So, and it's again
Yeah,
that sort of self-deprecating humor that certain fan bases have. Everton are a lot like us, I think, in that way. Of course, I'm
yeah.
focusing so much on this one song that you made, but there were many other things that you obviously did. You had the fan cams outside White Hart Lane,
Mm.
and outside away games as well. And I'll get onto an incident at Bournemouth in a couple of minutes.
Mhm.
I'm sure people like to hear about or remember. They were certainly interesting. Did you have any standout memories of being outside the stadium after a game, and you just thought to yourself, like, "What am I doing here?"
So the fan cams I think are worth talking about in a bit of
Mm,
depth, because I think it was the fan cams that the Spurs community were most afraid
mhm,
of. Like I said, they were worried that we were going to, find somebody like DT, somebody like Claude, somebody like Ty, all the Arsenal fan TV guys. And one of the first conversations I had with Neil, my boss at Fremantle, was just like that. He didn't want that, and I didn't want that either. I mean, it was clear at the time, and I think it's always been a bit clear. I know that Robbie, who I don't know personally, he always fights against this, but I think it's always been clear to me that it must have been really incredibly difficult for Robbie from Arsenal, who owns Arsenal Fan TV, when Arsenal were consistently losing, kind of in the knowledge that he was going to make more money that night. Like that's just that's the difficult reality. But I had no interest in that, and maybe one of the benefits of being being a plastic fan, as some people would call me, because I worked for a salary, it didn't affect me on a day-to-day basis, whether we had someone on fan cams who was going to, say mad stuff. Like, for me, it was more about finding people who were authentic. And actually, in terms of you asking what I remember, my main memory is the first time doing it outside White Hart Lane, when nobody knows who you are or what you're doing, just being like desperately trying to grab someone. And
mhm.
pretty much the first person who came was Chris Cowlin. And Chris Cowlin, I worked with Chris Cowlin again, doing watch-alongs for him. at the end of last season. And he said to me, I wouldn't be doing what I do now. I wouldn't be doing this channel if it hadn't been for you letting me, come on your channel and interviewing me every week. And he was a regular, and Chris is, I think, pretty much the opposite of what you'd call a character designed for clicks. He just is a normal bloke. He's just a normal bloke, loves Spurs, passionate about Spurs, and gave his opinions. And for me, it was more about that. In fact, to the point where if we had anyone who I could tell pretty quickly, and like I said, I've worked in TV, so I kind of have a bit of a producer's nose for it. If we had people on who I could tell pretty quickly were doing it to try and be famous, then we wouldn't really put them on. We wouldn't do that. And I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure we had in the building expressions at one point, early days, and just more like as a kind of trial thing. And I think, as I remember it, he was just a bit much for what I was kind of... I think he was probably a bit ahead of his time as well, to be honest. Like, it was a bit much for what I was looking for the channel. But actually, I think he's a genius, expressions at what he does, and he's absolutely got an audience. It's not me, but he's got an audience of young people who just love what he does. And I think kind of poetically, the guy is an absolute, he's like Eminem or something. He's a genuine street kind of rapper, but does it with football stuff. So yeah, that's kind of my recollections of the fan cams. Other than that, negatively, the fan cams were when I would get kind of most abuse from Spurs fans who really hated what we were doing. So I got sworn at and kind of aggressively shouted at semi-regularly. And I can remember a couple of times where I think it was some of the people who are quite kind of well known within the Spurs community and being kind of disappointed about that. But I also think, to some degree, and this, I might be completely wrong about this, but I also think there's an element of, I think everyone, because I've got a stupid posh name, thinks I'm just like a super posh guy who, probably doesn't really care about Spurs and never really kind of been involved in going to the games or anything like that. And we're really angry about this kind of middle classness of it as well, probably. And I can understand that because, I can't lie. I'm not from Tottenham. I grew up in Surrey. I can't change that. But I think as a kind of, probably people from around Tottenham, around the area, just like, why is this guy representing us? And I can understand that from their point of view as well.
Yeah, and it feeds into the idea that it's like this perceived authenticity that I sort of touched upon briefly earlier. And I think that's something that has been revisited over time a little bit. We've got such a large fan base across many countries now, and I think there's a lot more policing and correction when people sort of point out what is or isn't a Spurs fan. But there definitely is still that component within us, within the fan base, who thinks, you've got to be born within, 10 minutes of the stadium to be a true fan, or you've got to go to matches, you've got to do this, you've got to do that.
But I think and it makes, and I understand it, but I also think, I've sat down in pubs with many people like that, and within a minute, I think those people come around very quickly and just like, and all people really care about, if they don't know you, is whether, when they do meet you, is whether they can have a chat with you about the club within 30 seconds, and they know within 30 seconds that you either know your stuff or you don't. And that's really where the policing should be, but that's not the internet. The internet is like, oh, he's got a stupid name, he's made a terrible Amy Winehouse video, I'm going to hate him forever. And to some degree, like, can I say for sure that I don't judge people similarly sometimes? I probably do. I mean, I already took the piss in this already about the Arsenal guy with a bad voice. So, we're all capable of it.
So speaking of fan cams, there was an incident that came up where your microphone is picked up by the Bournemouth PA tannoy system. And some expletives were shared in the stadium after we beat Bournemouth 5-1 away, which is kind of fun. How did you feel when that happened? Do you want to explain to folks who maybe don't know about this? I do know that some of my listeners, maybe a little bit younger or maybe overseas, maybe weren't aware of this.
Yeah, so it was in the following season, kind of the season where we, third in a 2-horse race, and we went to Bournemouth, to the Vitality Stadium for the first time. I think they'd only just come up, and we decimated them 5-1. And I was in the ground. But what would happen when I was doing fan cams, when I was hosting fan cams, is I would have to leave kind of 5 minutes early so that I could meet my cameraman, who was a lovely boy called Glenn, who's now also really, really doing really well in the kind of football space as well. So I would meet him, and then he would give me the microphone. We'd kind of test the levels of the microphone, and then as the kind of Spurs fans would stream out, we'd try and grab people to interview. And like I said, we'd won 5-1, and Glenn was like, as we're testing the microphone, he was like, what was the game like? And I said, fucking hell, it was like men against boys. And I didn't even realize I was saying it. And basically what I then know is people are streaming out of the ground, and one of the people who was also on the ground was another presenter on the channel, Craig Mitch, and he came up to us and was like, what on earth just happened? And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, you just were talking on the tannoy system within the ground, within the Vitality Stadium. And I was like, what? And it was all very confusing, and it didn't make sense at the time. And then I'm interviewing people for the fan cams or whatever. And then when we finished the interviews with the fan cams, I look at my phone, and my phone has just gone mental. And one of the guys who works at Fremantle, one of my kind of senior producers, has messaged me and said, it's all over Twitter that the person who works on the public address system for Bournemouth had said, fucking hell, it's like men against boys, whilst the game was still going on. And at that point, it kind of was starting to make sense to me, like clearly the PA system had picked up our microphone, which is mad.
Yeah.
And kind of almost mad, but also kind of lucky, I guess, that it happened at one of the smallest grounds rather than one of the biggest grounds with the best kind of PA systems. I don't know. But anyway, so at that point, I'm like, well, I don't want to get this guy sacked. So we then, I mean, let me try and be transparent about this, actually. I guess a part of me thought I don't want to get this guy sacked. And then another part of me was like, how can we make the most of this in terms of, PR and press for the channel and whatever. So we quickly knocked off a video that I guess was about maybe 90 seconds long, where I was like, I'd just like to say that was me. That was not the Bournemouth tannoy guy. I'm sorry. I don't want him to get in trouble or whatever. And then all the national press picked it up. It was everywhere.
Yeah, BBC.
Kind of,
Yep.
Yeah, BBC, like all of the kind of all the digital national press. And so it was really like, it's the only time in my life actually where I've really experienced that kind of feeling of like, I guess your 24 hours of fame or whatever, because I was getting people reaching out to me from school. I was getting people asking to interview me or whatever. And all I've kind of thought about it forever since was, it was so lucky that that's all I said.
Yeah.
Because honestly, back then, what was I? I was like early 30s. I was with my friend Glenn, who we used to travel home and away together. I probably at that point would have said anything to try and make him laugh. And it's just kind of fortunate that I didn't say anything that he might have, I thought he might find funny, that obviously would be totally inappropriate or appalling. And lots of people could have got in huge amounts of trouble.
Yeah.
So the fact that all I said was fucking hell, it was men against boys, I think really added to the story, to be honest.
No Andy Gray, Richard Keys incident for you,
Well, exactly. Exactly. I mean, I think the reason, although one thing I will say about Andy Gray and Richard Keys and, hanging out the back of it and all that is, I think the reason why that ended up happening was because that was the straw that broke the camel's back. Like that was just happening so regularly with those guys, from everything I hear, particularly Richard Keys. And actually I worked weirdly. I once was the script writer for a remake of Gladiators when Sky remade it back in like the year, I don't know what year was it, like the late 2000s, I guess. So before it came back on BBC, and Ian Wright and Caroline Flack were the hosts back then. And bizarrely, Richard Keys' daughter was the runner. And I remember she came in on her first day of when we were shooting it, and she came in with a signed Manchester City football shirt that Richard Keys had got for the series producer. She's like, I'm the runner. I'm handing it to the series producer. That is some excellent buttering up, I think.
Yeah, that's a Nepo baby incident if I ever heard one.
Well, I'm afraid I'm somewhat of a Nepo baby myself. So that's another thing that I cannot have a go at people for, sadly.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm so glad I'm on here insulting my guests.
No. Like being a Nepo baby is, of course, ridiculous.
I wish I was a Nepo baby. I could do with the leg up. What kind of feedback? So I was just
going to say, I'm a Nepo baby without having had any of the kind of work-based leg up, unfortunately.
I'll ask you about that off camera.
Well, I made a whole podcast series about it, so if anyone wants to know about it, it's called Almost Famous. You go for it.
Cool. What was I going to say? Let me wind myself back. Oh, yeah. What kind of feedback did you get to that incident from the Spurs fan base? Because I can see if certain characters in our fan base did that, it would be almost sort of legendary stuff that would follow with them throughout time. I'm thinking, if Flav from the Fighting Cock did it, right? Like that would be, sort of it would be amazing in many ways. But I can see that with the sort of trepidation and hesitancy that some of the fan base had towards Spurred On,
Mm.
that sort of that happening could be, conspiracy theories could come up, like, are they meant to do this? This is because they want attention. This is,
Mm.
they've embarrassed us. Like, did you get a sense of acceptance from the fan base
No.
for that? Or?
Oh, well, yeah. So all I was going to say is I definitely don't remember any negativity around
Mm,
that, to be honest. I
that's
mean,
good. Yeah.
I could have blocked it out, but for me, I think it was more. I think based on what I said, I think most people did think that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I don't remember any conspiracy stuff. I mean, mainly I think on the basis that if we were if we were clever enough to know how to dial in to the to a Premier League grounds PA system, then I think we would have done it in a more pranky way.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe we couldn't have written a prank as good as that, but we would have filmed the before, the during, and the after. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
But no, I don't. I remember a lot of negativity around creating that channel and producing that channel, but I don't remember any around that part.
But you had so many notable talking heads and guests. You've already mentioned Reece James. You had Smithy from Soccer
Mm.
AM, Gaza. You had early Chris Cowlin, baby Chris Cowlin, which is kind of
Yeah.
fun. Anybody who stands out to you as being something you particularly enjoyed? I mean, getting to speak to Gascoigne, if he was your childhood hero, must have been kind of surreal.
Yeah, it was, but do you know what? I always feel a little bit the same when I see Paul Gascoigne doing stuff. Just that it feels a bit sad. As I remember it with Gaza, it was at the junket or the premiere for his documentary film. It's a brilliant film, such an unbelievably sad film, because the thing that really stood out for me about that film and his story is that he saw his best friend die when he was incredibly young, and clearly that is a huge reason as to why he's so traumatized and why he needed alcohol to battle his demons so much, because he had so many demons. So yes, he was undoubtedly my idol, but also whenever I see him, I sometimes feel like he's like almost wheeled out. And the other thing is, I'd worked back in 2004. I worked on fantasy football with Badil and Skinner.
Oh wow!
When they did it for
Euro
they did it for
2004.
the Euros, yeah. And they were all live shows. We'd do live shows after each of the Euros games, and Gaza came on one of those. And back then, my job was to look after the people in the green room, the guests in the green room before. So Gaza was there, and he was in one of his periods where he was desperately trying to stay off the booze. And I remember he had, and I'm not exaggerating, he had 12 Red Bulls. He had 12 Red Bulls. So he was trying to recreate the feeling of the buzz just without booze. And I think at that point you're probably better off having the booze. I don't know, maybe not, but you know what I mean. So yeah. I don't remember the Gascoigne interview being anything other than just being a little bit like, let's get it, because I knew my boss really wanted to get it, but also just like, it feels a bit like we're taking advantage of somebody who's really ill. But do you know what? You mentioned Smithy, so I'll talk about Smithy. Smithy is such a lovely man, honestly. And I'm so, he was already doing brilliantly. He was quite new off the back of Soccer AM, because he mainly started doing that kind of Frankie Fryer character, the fake Danny Dyer thing. But back when he started becoming a regular presenter on Spurred On, and he's just such a lovely guy. And he was also, you and I talked about imposter syndrome before we came on, and like I said then, is like, I feel like everyone has a bit of it. We're all kind of panicking underneath. But Smithy, I remember back then, and I hope he won't mind me saying that, I remember him just being like surprisingly like nervous as to how he came across. And I was like, no, Smithy is an unbelievable broadcaster, like a really brilliant presenter, and is doing some really great stuff as well in terms of mental health and things now. And we made some really fun stuff. We did some Smithy versus Slats. Slats is like one of my nicknames. We did some episodes of some little formats of things. And he's not only a brilliant presenter, but also a really incredible footballer. And I used to, and his knowledge of football is amazing as well. So every time we did this format where it was me against him, I'd lose. And I'm really competitive and really think I know football and that I'm half decent at football. I used to be a half decent goalkeeper, but he beat me at everything, and it was so annoying. But no, Smithy is a lovely guy, and I'm sure his star will just continue to go brighter and brighter.
Yeah, there's an awful lot of like polish that goes into making Soccer AM, I imagine. I mean, in many ways, they started the idea of getting fans on TV for content, which I think is vastly underrated, with their fans of the week that would come and sit in the studio. For folks who don't know, Soccer AM was a TV show. I guess it started 25 years ago, 26, 27.
Mm-hmm.
It would be in the lead up on a Saturday morning. two presenters, Tim Lovejoy and Helen
Helen
Chamberlain.
Chamberlain.
That's it, yeah, Hell's Bells. And yeah, they would have a bunch of skits and coverage, and current footballers, ex-footballers would come on. Yeah, again, now I look back and reflect on it, it did have some of the DNA of what we see in content and fan channels on YouTube. Set the, not a standard necessarily, but certainly seeded some ideas and showed that there were people who wanted to watch it.
Yeah.
And I think I've become one of those people over time. I don't know whether it's because I grew up watching Soccer AM. We were very much a Soccer AM household. But I think I prefer to see other fans talking about Spurs. I have almost a, not revulsion, but I kind of hate it when outsiders comment on us, because they don't always talk about the minutiae. They don't always give full context, and they have got their own narratives in play, which in some regards reflect the wider culture of football in general. But sometimes it's perhaps to move a narrative that we as fans don't agree with. I think that's where content comes in. How do I transition this into a question? What about Spurred On's impact? How do you think you would have succeeded or not if you had started now? Right, you've got competition for certain. We are
really
on TV,
good question.
etc.
Yeah, really good question. I mean, at the time, I would look back. I don't know if you've obviously done some research, so very impressive. But I feel like in hindsight at the time, I feel like it pretty much was the first Spurs kind of YouTube channel. There were people doing it in the bedrooms kind of thing. Like Craig Mitch had a show called The Hotspot. That's where I found him. But he didn't have that many subs at the time. What I would say is it was either the first, what it definitely was the first to have kind of funding behind it, for better or worse. What I found really quickly with Spurred On was, because I was sitting in an office with these other content creators doing channels for all the other clubs, I learned really quickly how much smaller, and I hate to say it, but how much smaller in terms of fan base Spurs were at that time then. So the Chelsea fans channel with Rory just grew so much quicker. The Man City one with Stephen McInerney actually was similar to Spurs, and that's because if you think about Man City, even though this was 2015, they'd only in the last 5 years or 10 years or so been bought by Abu Dhabi. So they didn't have a kind of huge fan base in the way, whereas Chelsea had been under Abramovich by that point, 10, 12, 13 years.
Yeah,
so in terms of YouTube...
Pre-Pep Guardiola too.
Yeah. So in terms of YouTube viewers who back then were especially young, the Chelsea fans channel was just at the right moment, and Man United, obviously biggest club in the world, etc., etc. So I really learned early, we struggled in terms of growth, and we never got, even though we did Spurred On for over 18 months, and they plowed a lot of money into, like you said, sending us all around the world and paying for presenters, and we had a studio and a set that we were sharing with the other guys and whatever, but we never made it above 18,000 subs. We never made it above 18,000 subscribers on YouTube. Which, was a really slow burn. And the way to compare it, if I started now, is that I started my own channel 2 years ago, literally 2 years ago in October. And I'm now at kind of 18,000 subscribers, which is pretty much exactly the same growth. The only difference is I make this in my bedroom. I spend no money on it whatsoever, other than, every so often I have to buy a light or a camera or a microphone or whatever. And really it just kind of, YouTube has changed a little bit, but really it just shows that you have to be persistent, you have to be patient. And I think to some degree, if you're quite determined to do it in what I would call an authentic way, by which I mean, the way I think of my Tottenham content is to literally just talk about how I feel. So I heard a brilliant episode of your podcast where you were talking about, those podcasters who do it maybe on a monthly basis rather than a daily or a weekly basis, and how that month allows them to kind of not deal with the kind of ups and downs of how you feel after a game, right? But for me, if I wasn't doing it on YouTube, I'd be doing it in the pub with a mate or whatever. And so that's kind of the choice I've made. And that is how I feel. So after Chelsea last Saturday, we're filming this recording this on the 7th. After Chelsea, I was absolutely apoplectic. I was apoplectic. I've never been as frustrated watching a game as that. And then after Copenhagen, suddenly I've got the joys of spring about me. And I'm like, well, if he plays Pap Sarr and is a bit more aggressive against Man United tomorrow, we might be onto something for the rest of the season. And that's authenticity for me, because that's how I feel and I'm not faking that. And I think if you're going to be authentic doing Spurs content, then it is a slow burn. I think it is a slow burn, unless you're a genius like Expressions, which adds on like a different layer of, okay, I think he's attracting Spurs fans. I think he's probably attracting other fans as well, kind of waiting for him to go mental at Spurs in a really poetic way. But I don't really have that in me. I just want to talk to a kind of like-minded Spurs fans, ideally in quite a, in a way that isn't anyone, because I used to do last season, I used to do watch-alongs for We Are Tottenham TV a bit as well. And they do have some people who come on from like Tottenham away and some of those kind of more, I'd say kind of more negative corners of the fan base. Like there's a guy called what's his name? Mr. Big Time or something. I can't remember, but I had to speak to him.
Oh, yes, I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
But he would purposely antagonize or try and antagonize. And I'll be honest, like I don't have much time for that. Like I am aware that if I regularly got those guys on my channel, I'd probably grow a lot quicker and make more money. But on a kind of level of being able to deal with conversations, I don't really have the time for that.
Yeah, you've carried on a little bit of what you did with Spurred On. You had Kish from Lily White Lab. You're just getting interesting
because he's brilliant.
Yeah,
because he's brilliant.
He is brilliant. Absolutely. Yeah. I definitely recommend people go and listen to that. It came out this week as of the 7th of November. Yeah, it's great stuff. I really enjoy Spurred On. I've been talking about it for a fair bit on Poddenham without connecting the dots that the Spurred On daily podcast was the same as the fan channel of many years ago. Just 'cause I think that I memory hold the name.
Yeah.
But as soon as you started talking, I went, "Oh my goodness, yes." How do they not do it?
I'm glad you brought that up because when I decided to start my own channel a couple of years ago, I had a proper job at a rival football club. We can talk about that. And I was like, if I'm ever going to make the break for it and just be like, try and build something myself, it's got to be now. And it should have been 10 years ago when Spurred On stopped. I should have done it then. I don't know why. Well, I do know why I didn't, but it's kind of more personal stuff. So I made a break for it and I thought, and I don't know, I'd be interested to find out whether you think this is the right decision or not. But I thought by calling my audio podcast when I started my new channel 2 years ago, the Spurred On podcast, that might drag across some fans when they see it from previously. But I'll be honest, I'm not sure it really has. And actually my YouTube channel that is the same stuff, everything I shoot on YouTube every day goes on the Spurred On audio podcast. My YouTube channel is just at Barnaby Slater _ So I don't know whether I made the right decision to call it the Spurred On podcast or not, but I don't think it really makes a huge difference either way, to be honest.
It's interesting that you kept ownership of the name, that Fremantle didn't sort of hold on to that.
Fremantle sold all the channels to Social Chain back when Social Chain was owned by Stephen Bartlett. Okay. And I was in the meetings where those channels were being sold and Stephen was there wearing a silly little hat. And that was also an interesting time for other reasons.
Okay. So there was a decision
He's an interesting dude, let's put it that way.
I think I've read some stuff. So there was a decision made to wind down Spurred On, and I assume some of the other channels.
Yeah. So basically on the same, on the same day, the higher ups, decided they weren't making enough money. And my boss, Neil, at the time, he was like, you've got to stick at this for 5 years. Otherwise, there's no point. You won't make money for 5 years. And actually, I think if they'd stuck at it, then now they would be making a lot of money and a lot of brand money, but they didn't. And in the end, Fremantle, they closed all of the club channels and then they sold the Football Republic, which was huge. And one of the big reasons it was huge is because Adam Boltwood, who was the producer, was really brilliant, a genius in terms of content. He'd previously worked at Football Daily. But he got on board the True Geordie really early on, back when True Geordie hadn't as yet been cancelled. And the True Geordie kind of helped bring a lot of subscribers to the Football Republic. And so the Football Republic sold to Social Chain, who straight away were like, we think we can make so much money out of this with brand deals. And then a year later, they realized they weren't making enough money as well. And then 2 years later, it kind of closed down for good.
Yeah, and what a shame. It's always kind of a sad day when you see these passion projects end up, kind of, I don't know, breathe their last breath. But fortunately,
business is difficult. That's the thing. I mean, I think what happened was a lot of people thought they could make money out of something. And I would still stick to the fact that these days, the people making money out of it are pretty much the people who started on their own and are able to kind of build piece by piece. That's, if you look at Robbie and AFTV and unless you've got unless you've got huge name talent, so obviously Rio, with all the stuff he's done,
Yeah.
he has an audience that will come straight away, and then he can bring people on like Joel Bayer and Stephen Howson, who have experience in that, and they can add to the kind of content side of it. But it's really the people like, I think, like Robbie, or even with the Kickoff, and then the boys who broke off from the Kickoff to go and do the club. With the Kickoff started because True Geordie started his own audience with, and then Lawrence McKenna came involved, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think businesses are yet to kind of really find a way to plow money into this and actually make it back.
If you look at somebody like Mike Lee on the Spurs show, who I interviewed last week, 2 weeks ago, if he, one of the most popular Spurs podcasts is saying there's no money here.
No.
I think that's a good example of don't get into this for the money. Get into it because you want to have, you want to have good conversations with people. You want to put yourself out there. You want to create something.
That's true. But what I would also say is there's certainly no money in it if there are a lot of you doing it, I don't think. But if what I would look at is the We Are Tottenham TV boys, who, I don't know if I'm encroaching on future questioning here, but basically they started, when they wanted to start a channel, they came and interviewed with me, or they came and had a meeting with me when I was doing Spurred On at Fremantle, but Spurred On had just finished and I was doing the Football Republic, and they said, can we buy your channel? So they were really keen to start something and try and get kind of a leg up. And, Fremantle were going to charge them far too much to buy it off them. But the reason why I think We Are Tottenham TV is huge, and Chris Cowlin is huge, is because they've just been unbelievably persistent for 10 years, for 9 years. And over that period of time, there will have been a lot of Tottenham content creators who've started and then been like, oh, wait, I'm doing a lot for a lot of my time for not very much, if any, money at all. And would have been like, or they've had family issues or things happen in their real life. But I think if you are persistent with it and you stick at it, and it really is kind of like your passion, so it doesn't feel like a job, then you probably down the line can make some half decent money from it. But I would say, I don't know how well Chris and the We Are Tottenham TV boys do money wise, but I'd say I know that they go on all the tours. That's all I can say. So if you're earning enough from your content to be able to fly to South Korea, that sounds like a good gig to me.
Same here. Or if the club would happily, fly me out, I would take it, right?
Well, the club hate fan channels. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, I know. I've heard. Do you know if anybody from the club listens to you or paid attention to Spurred On?
No, I don't. I know. I don't remember the exact circumstances, but I know back in the day when we were doing the Spurred On that I heard some mutterings that there was annoyance. That's for sure. I mean, the only club that I can think of that actually brought in the fan channels was Arsenal. Did bring Robbie in at a couple of, at least one occasion, I remember, over a period of time to do some stuff for them. But I think it stopped relatively quickly. I think that's never going to cross over. I don't think that's going to work.
No, me neither. And I think that as a fan channel, it would be nice to have it, but you probably ideally don't want it, because that's when your sort of journalistic independence, which is a grandiose phrase for a fan channel, I guess, in some cases. But like that gets compromised. And we talked about authenticity earlier. Like, how authentic can you be about your feelings about the club if you've got to toe a line? As you're worried about not getting invited to an event or being brought on, tours or getting sent merch packs or what have you.
I mean, I guess some influencers get sent merch packs, but I don't know if many go to fan channels. But what I would say is, as I've heard Flav talk about it a lot, and it's definitely true. You get accused of being in the pocket of the club, that's for sure. Like, I hear Flav talk about it all the time, and it is funny when you get accused, like, oh yeah, like Daniel Levy was contacting Flav and being like, yeah, say this and say that. Flav, is the least likely person who would ever do anything for anybody else on request, I think, in terms of his authenticity. So that's I think there's a like my opinion is there's like a side to the internet where it's just like a lot of envy. And I think people probably look at someone like Flav, who's made an incredible career for himself because he's a brilliant broadcaster, and they look at him and they're envious. So I better accuse him of being in the pocket of the club somehow. And it's like, no, you're really not judging the person there if that's what you're accusing them of.
Absolutely true, and I can confirm that Poddenham Podspur is completely journalistic and independent from Tottenham Hotspur Football Club. Vinay Venkatesham does not email me and tell me which podcasters to review.
Well, I did notice, Iain, that Poddenham Podspur started around the time Vinay Venkatesham's came on board. I wonder if this is part of his new communication strategy.
Yeah, it was me and the Scarves. That was the two groups.
You and Bodo.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So you transitioned to a daily pod format. You also do big up watch-alongs, I think, this season.
Yes, I heard you. I heard you talk about in your watch-alongs episode. Ask why would I do big up?
Yeah, I'm interested in who you think is watching the watch-alongs. Are they watching you in sort of place of ordinary commentary? Do you think they don't have access to a feed? What do you think's going on there?
Watch-alongs. So I did my first watch-along back in 2016 for the Euros as part of TFR. We started them back then, and I remember back then, them being talked about how they were going to be the next big thing in terms of second screening. That was when people started talking about second screening. So people muting the commentary that they, I mean, let's imagine maybe Iain, even you would listen to watch-along commentary if Alan Smith was co-coms every time you watch Spurs, which is something that I know a lot of the Tottenham fan base, including myself, find abhorrent that man continually co-coms on Spurs.
I get Graham Lasso and Lee Dixon over here in the US, so it's pretty bad as well.
Yeah, that is pretty bad. Yeah, in terms of London rivals.
Yeah.
So basically, when I started, my daily podcast a couple of years ago and YouTube channel, I was basically just like, well, I want this to grow as quickly as possible. So will I start doing watch-alongs? I didn't straight away. And then I reached out to the We Are Tottenham TV boys because I'd done some work with them down the years and obviously had met them years ago and said, if you're looking for anyone to host your watch-alongs, feel free to give me a shout. And they really kindly kind of gave me a job doing that, which I did for probably 10 months or so. And then, unfortunately, I kind of moved house and it became slightly less viable to get to their Potter's Bar studio. So they do have. I think I heard you talk about whether you didn't know if they had a studio.
I thought it was a studio, but I couldn't quite tell. Sometimes the way that things are filmed nowadays, I assumed it was.
It is a studio, yeah. It's a studio in Podspur. And so then I reached out to Chris Cowlin and said, look, I've been doing watch-alongs for those guys. You don't do them. Do you want to sit? Blah, blah, blah. So I've worked with both of them last season. And then this year, I had been already in conversations with this new platform called Big Up. And Big Up is basically they're a startup based in America, based in New York. And they are keen to basically become the place for live watch-alongs for football. So yes, you can get lots of watch-alongs on YouTube, but it's not only for that, so they're kind of that's where they see their niche. And really, once I stopped working with Chris Cowlin, it became basically a revenue stream thing. So they offer me a bit of money. It's not it's not game-changing money or whatever, but they're trying to grow their platform. So what they get is I do watch-alongs for their channel. And then when I'm doing my YouTube, as I'm sure you've heard when you've listened to me, when I do my YouTube or audio podcast stuff, I will then push to Big Up and say, look, if you want to come and watch a Spurs game with me, then come to Big Up. This is how, and that's how it works for them. So it's kind of purely a revenue stream thing. But as I'm sure, if there are many, well, it's interesting. You said earlier, as Mike Lee said, there's not much money in podcasts. That I can tell you the bottom has fallen out of audio podcasting at the moment. The money is less than it has ever been. And at the moment, the algorithm has changed on YouTube as well. So a lot of content creators are really struggling on YouTube as well. So if you're trying to make this as your career, which, along with kind of, I'm doing stand up again. And, I used to do pretty well as a copywriter for brands, but AI has taken that. But if you're trying to make this your career, then you're looking at ways to add revenue streams, as boring as that phrase is, wherever you can.
And as you should, you've got to keep food on the table. You've got to keep making it worth your time. And I'm sure that some part of Big Up, I'm not too well versed in the platform, but YouTube has a lot of limitations on it. I'm sure that it's somewhat freeing as well to be behind a paywall to discuss and share more honest opinions than on YouTube, where you might get more people who don't know who you are, who aren't bought into your character. And
people who come to watch Big Up don't have to pay.
Oh,
they don't have to pay. No, they can. You can come across and watch. You just have to join the community. It's not pay only. What Big Up is doing is trying to add. They're trying to add layers to the live watch along experience. So on YouTube, you can basically only do the watch along. If you're graphically clever enough, which I'm not, you can obviously have your graphics on there and whatever. But on Big Up, they're kind of adding things to it within the platform, which is, tactics boards. They're adding kind of fantasy sweepstake games, stuff like that. So it's definitely a completely niche platform, and I enjoy doing it on there. But it is one thing I've always found from working in digital for the last 10 years is people do not want to be told to move from one platform to another. You kind of have your favorite platform and you stick to that to some degree. And so it's very difficult to get click through and crossover.
And I'm super impressed by people who can do watch-alongs. You'll sit there for 2 hours talking, and you're keeping it flowing and going. It's something I could never do.
Have you ever tried? You
I
don't know you can do it.
No, I don't
You might
want
be
to.
able to do it.
No, I hate the sound of
Well,
my own voice, let alone 2
that's
hours.
different. Whether if you're not gonna do it if you don't want to. That's for sure.
I go
Because
and
like you said, it is 3 hours of interminable sound of your own voice. Yeah.
I do enough of that at the pub, you know. Those are my live watch-alongs. Just come along to the bar with me.
I'd be much better at watch-alongs if I was in the pub. I can guarantee that.
So you make a daily pod, and like I said earlier, I enjoy it. Spurred On is one of the ones that I pick up, especially if because they're only half an hour, which I really enjoy. You know, as somebody who listens to a lot,
Maximum.
they're great for that. Like 20 minutes, just a little bite, a little bit of news, a little bit of commentary, a little bit of opinion. Sometimes you'll go on a rant. I noticed there's some hour-long ones that you've gone on a rant on, which I've enjoyed too.
I did a few longer ones around the time we won the Europa League.
Yeah, I think so.
Like I did one around the, because right then I was literally like the happiest time in my life. Just because you brought it up, and sorry to interrupt, but
please.
The reason that I try and keep them bite size is because I cannot believe and fathom the interminable length of some of the big podcasts. Like some of them go to over 2 hours.
3 hours I've seen.
And listen, no shade on the people who do it. It's more just like, how do they do it? I cannot, but I know they have lots of guests and that helps.
Yes.
But I have found, and I've been on some of those podcasts, and like I said, they're all brilliant guys, the guys who run them. But I do find that in essence, what you get is the same people saying the same thing 6 times over a little bit. And I'm quite determined. Also, because maybe a little bit because I'm lazy as well. I don't know, but also it's like, how much can I really talk about every day about Spurs? Often there isn't enough. There literally isn't enough. So 10 to 20 minutes max, ideally, all the time.
Yeah. I started off this podcast doing 10, 20 minutes, just fitted well, especially if you're doing the single person microphone. It's so much more refreshing than trying to go for an hour. Interviews and things I find a little bit longer, gives you more breathing space. But I find the half hours are pretty good. The 3 hours, I do wonder if they actually get anybody listening for the full time, or whether it's more about capturing audience on YouTube, right? You've got 3 hour blocks live when you've got people clicking in and clicking off. So that's, I wonder if that's the intent. Not because you're necessarily getting more out of the listener, the speakers, the hosts and guests that you have.
Look, you're saying the right thing, because I've assumed that it must be that, they must have tried every time length to be like, well, this is what makes us the most money.
I think that too.
But I'm kind of surprised by that, because every time I've done, when I do, because I often do live YouTube post-match reactions, for instance, and you have your CPM, your cost per minute, what you're making based on each view. And it definitely doesn't help me if I do something way longer, just because more people are clicking on and off. It's to do with almost the standard of that view, where in the world it's from, and stuff like that. So I'm not 100% sure that that's why, but also maybe there's just an element of it where they do so much, maybe they only do once or twice a week, in which case they feel they haven't talked about everything. I'm not sure, but there must be something financial to it as well. Otherwise it seems a bit mad.
I listened. For the very first episode of this podcast, I did a review of Last Word on Spurs, and something that I noticed when I was listening back.
Ricky is an amazing guy as well. I've met Ricky loads of time. Lovely guy.
Incredible. I need to reach out to him, like Mike Lee contacting Salman Rushdie.
Salman Rushdie. I couldn't believe it when he brought up Salman Rushdie. He's like, it came across to me like, oh, and Salman Rushdie keeps on saying no. I'm like, wait, didn't he have his eye chopped out last month?
I think he did. Yeah, he got attacked, right?
Yeah, he's blind now, or semi-blind.
Makes watching Spurs easier. I don't know. But something that I noticed was there is a transition in the way that people interact, especially in these channels where you've got not strangers necessarily, but people who aren't on a call every week. Like the regular podcasts where you get the same hosts every time, versus the weekly ones like Last One on Spurs, where they get guests in. Sometimes there's ordinary fans, sometimes they're celebrities, sometimes they're other podcasters. But I found something about them being in that room for 2 hours. There's a shift in how they interact with each other. It's like the guards drop in the second hour. And I wonder if it's the same thing with the longer YouTube shows too, as you get people warming up to each other, or you get more heightened reactions as time goes on, which click up better and go on social media. Maybe.
Yeah, really good point.
maybe.
Yeah, really good point. I hadn't really thought about that. I mean, the other thing that's really impressive about like what Ricky does with Last Word on Spurs and Chris with
Hmm.
the Spurs Chat podcast is the admin involved in booking guests. It's interminably annoying. Is trying to as you know, just booking one guest, and every so often I'll book a guest for mine. It's interminably annoying to me because I feel such responsibility straight away to making sure I don't pull out, making sure that the
Hmm.
technology is good enough, making sure it happens on time, and that I don't kind of portray them in the wrong way, etc., etc. So to be booking, sometimes 4 or 5 guests twice a week, and then I know, or certainly last time I spoke to Ricky, I know he had a full-time job, and Chris Cowlin owns his own company. Chris Cowlin, I have to say, is a workaholic, and I don't know how he lives. I really don't, because he's spewing out content, like often 10 to 12 bits of content every day, and he has a proper job and stuff. But yeah, to me, the booking of guests and stuff is something that stops me from doing those kind of what you were calling in your show kind of more panel based podcasts, because it would stress me out on an admin level far too much.
And also just managing those personalities in a call,
Yeah. Although you can sometimes just set them off and then they just go at each other. I could see how that to me isn't as scary as trying to email 6 separate people.
I think it depends on the type of person you are and the type of podcast you want to create. Like on this show, I go in as much as possible where I can, and I try to be positive and see the positives and amplify the positives. I know that on my watch along episode, I was perhaps a little more scathing than I have been in other times, but again, I wanted to be realistic about how I felt.
Can I just say that in that episode, I thought you were way more scathing than you were. Like I don't even think you were scathing at all.
Yeah.
I thought you were incredibly fair.
I think it just shows you where I want to be. So when I get other people on, I'm very conscientious of not putting the boot in on podcasters who are out there every week, not quite bearing their soul, but bearing a fair amount of it, and being vulnerable and open, and lots of words that men don't like to use about themselves mostly. And people attack them for it. And I don't want that to be this. And although I've never invited anybody on who is in that way inclined, in the back of my head, I'm like, I got to make sure that this conversation doesn't get into YouTube drama,
No, and listen, I agree, and that's why I try and only bring on people on a similar way myself. But also, I think when you're not paying people, in essence, I think to then bring people on and potentially slag them off is a weird take. And some people do that, and it's fair play if they've got the strength to do that. But I don't know. But I just wanted to ask you, while we're on the subject of getting internet hate and stuff, have you found any, since you started Poddenham Podspur, have you found any pushback yourself or any negativity? And if so, how have you, or how would you deal with that, do you think?
Not a ton. I don't think I'm quite big enough yet. We'll see if with the extra eyes I get on the channel through me going on Rule the Roost, through having Flav on, having yourself on, talking to Mike Lee, from the Spurs show, and being amplified across their channels, whether I start to receive stuff. The only negative feedback that I think I've received is from somebody who blocked me on Bluesky because they were being a bit of a shit. And
to be blocked on Bluesky is quite something, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And they're all shit.
I thought Bluesky was the place where everybody was lovely.
No, apparently I'm the one who's not lovely.
You're the first person to be blocked in the history of Bluesky. Well done.
Yeah, exactly. I've had a lot of positivity. I think people enjoy it.
Rightly so.
So thank you. Okay, so 2 last questions I ask everybody, and I know we're at an hour, but I ask everybody these 2 questions, and I want to get to you on them. They're fairly simple, but have fun with it. What is it about Spurs that inspires people to create hundreds of podcasts about this club?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would probably just have to go back to what I said earlier. Is just there's this, like I said, like this almost Spurs as a way of life is so similar to that feeling of like having achievable goals but never quite achieving them, and so kind of inspiring you almost to keep going. Like that's kind of what it feels like being a Spurs fan, and that's what it feels like in my life as well. Like, even to the point of talking about having a podcast, it's like, is there something every single day that makes me think I don't want to get out of bed and I don't want to record any content? Yes, every single day there's a reason not to do it, but for some reason, because I have these achievable goals, because I want to make a career out of it, because I think it's the thing that I know most about and talk most passionately about, I am now finally, and it took me like 43 years basically to decide this, but I've decided that this is the career I want, alongside some other side projects as well. And I feel like supporting Spurs is almost like a version of that. Is like, are we ever realistically going to win the Champions League or the Premier League in my lifetime? I mean, I think the odds would tell me no, but there's something in my mind, in the same way that it's in my mind, maybe we will beat Man United tomorrow. And it's like, maybe we will win the Premier League in my lifetime. Like, and that is something to aspire to. And I think if you grew up as of course, like in every schoolyard, there were people who chose the team they support based on who was the best, right? And I'm just delighted that I didn't. My dad was a Liverpool fan, and I'm kind of ecstatic that my dad wasn't very present in my life, because I would have won everything by now over and over again. And I wouldn't have this kind of football-based thing to aspire to. Whereas being a Spurs fan, it also kind of allows you to take the hits.
Mhm.
You have the piss taken out of you so much as a Spurs fan that it means you've got a thick skin. You develop this thick skin that or it helps you develop a thick skin that then you can use in real life as well. So it's like, yes, when somebody abuses me, as I get regularly on YouTube in the comments or on TikTok or whatever, it's like, all I think about is how can I reply to this in the most amusing, hopefully amusing way. And being a Spurs fan, you have to learn to be amusing, because there's nothing more funny than being a Spurs fan.
We're definitely in it for the journey and for the ride. We're not in it
For
for
the journey
necessarily
and the
so
ride,
much
Ian,
for the
exactly.
for the end point. Because in theory, for many of us, the end point would have been that Europa League win this summer. Because there's a very good chance that's going to be the most prestigious trophy some of us see for a long
Yeah,
time.
or it's the start of
There we
huge
go.
things.
There we go. Well said. I'm saying a lot today. Apologies. Any advice for aspiring content creators? You've kind of done it all.
Yeah, I'm in danger, I'm sure, of saying what I guess everyone says, but you've just got to do it, and you've just got to stick to it. And I am the absolute king of starting things, having what I think are great ideas, starting them, and then quitting at the first opportunity. And this, like I said, this is the first time I've been doing this iteration of the audio, the Spurred On podcast, and then Barnaby Slater _ my YouTube channel about Spurs. This is the first time I've stuck at anything for 2 years. And I'm like determined to give it 10 years. I'm like, this is like my 10-year plan. Yes, there are slow points. Like at the moment, it's dead. It's a bin fire. Like it's like nobody is watching, nobody is listening. There are no subscribers or whatever. But I'm positive that if I stick at it, at some point, some bit of magic will happen where I'm in the right place at the right time. Maybe another, akin to the Bournemouth moment or something. And it will lead to, a job doing something where I can do this alongside it, or it will lead to somebody contacting me and being like, oh, we'd love you to present on our big channel or something like that. But if I don't stick to it, I know from previous experience that having given up on loads of stuff, that the next day or the next week, an opportunity will come and it'll be like, oh no, I gave that up, so I can't do it. So if you feel like you want to be a content creator, don't listen to people who slag off content creators, for one, because I think it mainly comes from a place of envy. And if you feel like you want to be a podcaster and you've got something to say, even if that thing to say is just, I support Tottenham and this is how I feel about, the fact that Richarlison just hit the bar from a penalty, when he should have given it to Dane Scarlett, then just do it. And as I've heard you talk about, Iain, before on your brilliant podcast, we're in a technology world now where you can literally just do it on your phone and you can upload it. And there will always be somebody, even if it's just your mum, and in my case, it often is, who will listen to what you have to say.
Yep, just make it, put it out there, and you know what? You can always delete it later.
Well, there is that as well. Although apparently that's really bad news for the TikTok algorithm, I've recently learned.
Yeah, well, I know so little about TikTok because I'm incredibly uncool.
No, I think it's more uncool the fact that I am a man in his 40s who is trying to learn about TikTok.
You have a pretty big TikTok following, though, right? I think you're like the 3rd or 4th largest YouTube account over there. Like expressions is, I forget. I have a spreadsheet, but I don't think I have the full.
I don't think you talked about, in terms of TikTok, Ben Bowman and Seb, who are the biggest. And they're huge, and they're Spurs fans. They are brilliant as well. Like they are enviably brilliant at what they do. And but no, I'm like, like I said, like I'm way too old to be doing TikTok, but I'm trying to kind of get to grips with it. And listen, I'll tell you this: when you get a video on TikTok that you have made and it goes really well, I'll tell you guys a mad story actually, and you can choose to cut it if you want, but it only happened last Friday. I don't know if you saw during the Nottingham Forest game where Marinakis, it was I think against Porto in the Europa League, Marinakis was filmed in the stand at his seat, and it really looked like he'd done a line of cocaine off his hand. Right, so I
took a bump.
Basically, it looked like, I think it was his mobile phone. It looked like he was doing a bump either off a key or off his phone. Right, So I put that video at the beginning of a TikTok thing, and then I made a video that's like 90 seconds long, just like, I wonder why it is that Marinakis always seems so angry and makes rash decisions and is always like, blah, blah, blah. And it started to bang. It had done by kind of 8:00 that night, it had done like 250,000 views. And I was like, I'm going to make some money out of this. This is brilliant. This is, I'm getting to know TikTok or whatever. And then I started looking through the comments, and so many of them were Greek. And so I'm having to translate them all. And they're all just going, how do you want to be killed best? You're going to have concrete poured in your shoes and buried at the bottom of the ocean. And they started telling me how Marinakis, all the dodgy stuff and how he's killed people and how I'm going to get killed, that I actually ended up deleting it. Because I was like,
Wow.
I don't know if I'm going to be able to get on the train, because I'm genuinely going to. And of course, the next day I was like, you're so ridiculous and almost borderline narcissistic to think that Marinakis is going to find some fucking TikToker from South London and kill him. But honestly, I just didn't know if I'd be able to sleep at night. So I deleted it. And that's how mental TikTok is, and how mental when you're getting death threats can be from people who know Mr. Marinakis.
Man, there's already such a weird rivalry developing between Forest and Spurs fans after that whole saga in the summer.
We always win, as I call it, mate. I call it the Morgan Gibbs White fortnight.
Yeah.
Never has my YouTube channel been so popular. I did the best numbers, and it was because Spurs fans were so ecstatic at getting this great player, and Forest fans were watching as well, because they were like, "You don't know Marinakis," and it turns out they were right.
Yep. Well, thank you for your time, Barnaby. Quick plugs. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, so if you like audio podcast, and it's like Iain kindly said, daily Tottenham stuff, go to the Spurred On podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And then if you'd like to watch me do that as well, because it's the same stuff but just on YouTube, it's at Barnaby Slater _ on YouTube. And listen, once again, thanks so much for having me on. I apologize if I've talked too much. I know I can be a bit of a rambler, but I love your podcast, and it's genuinely... I don't go on a lot of podcasts, but I really, really wanted to come on yours, which is why I reached out to you and said, what a brilliant, brilliant idea and what a great podcast. So thanks again.
No worries. And it's anytime, and we'll have to touch base again in the future.
Very welcome to come on mine anytime you want.
Absolutely.
Like I said, oh, brilliant. Well, I'll definitely have you on, because like I said, I really love people who can talk in a non-hyperbolic way about this mad club of ours.
I save that for everything else in my life.
I can believe you.
Well, thanks to everybody for listening. I've been Iain. You can follow the show on Bluesky at Poddenham Podspur, @bsky.social. Email me at poddenhampodspur@gmail.com. Keep being beautiful. Keep listening to Spurs podcasts. Keep making Spurs podcasts, and up the Spurs. Cheers.